Today we're going to talk about how to increase glutathione in the liver. And let's see, just testing my audio. All right, I think I'm good. Okay, so we're answering a question from YouTube. I'll share my screen real quick. And this is on the video, what does an upregulated GGT gene do to the glutathione status from today? And RTL says, steps to take that might help increase glutathione in the liver. Thanks, Chris. So today we're going to answer that. And this is going to be a real quick one because, well, I actually think I went through this in detail yesterday, but it was just buried in an 1.5-hour video on selenium. So, or maybe it was the day before. Anyway, all right. So glutathione, real quick, I'll field any, in the live chat, I'll field any questions on glutathione. But quick breakdown. So glutathione is a tripeptide, which means it's made out of 3 amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Protein's the stuff in your meat and eggs, to a lesser extent, eggs and dairy. Well, any animal flesh, meat, fish, shellfish, etc. Beans are the best plant source of protein. So any of these proteins are made of amino acids. Glutathione is a tripeptide made from 3 of them. There is glutathione in food. And I do have a glutathione in foods database. If you go to chrismasterjohnphd.com and you click on tools, you'll find the searchable database of glutathione in foods. You can also Google Master John glutathione database, and that should also make it come up. But most of your glutathione is going to be made in your body, in your cells, from the amino acids derived from the digestion of the protein that you eat. And the liver is going to do the bulk of that. So every cell is going to make its own glutathione, but and some cells can take up glutathione intact. Some have to break it down and take up the amino acids and remake the glutathione inside. But the liver has, first of all, the liver has a high need for glutathione itself, especially because of its role in detoxification. But also the liver is basically handling the excess sulfur amino acid load of the body to act as a reservoir for sulfur amino acids. Sulfur amino acids are methionine and cysteine. Cysteine is the one that is found inside glutathione. And so the liver is responsible for basically, the other thing is free cysteine is toxic. And that's part of the reason why N-acetylcysteine is even sold as a supplement versus just L-cysteine. Because the cell, if it is exposed to a high concentration of free cysteine, it has to do something with it very fast, or else it will basically kill the cell from oxidative stress. Most things that can protect against oxidative stress can, in the wrong context, cause oxidative stress, and cysteine is one of those things. And so the liver basically makes glutathione for itself, but also makes glutathione to use the hepatic glutathione pool and the glutathione cycle of taking up protein, putting out glutathione, breaking it down, putting it back in, just circulating that through the body. It uses that to mop up all the excess cysteine that doesn't have to be used for something in any given moment, and store it inside glutathione, so that glutathione can then be either glutathione or, when it gets broken down, be a source of cysteine that you can pull from on an as needed basis, and only allow enough free cysteine for your uses and not enough to cause oxidative stress. So, the question of how to increase glutathione in the liver is largely the question of how to increase glutathione. That's not to say that every cell is always going to respond in exactly the same way, but it is to say that most of the glutathione in the body is going to be made in the liver. And most cells in the body are in some way dependent on the liver making glutathione to have access to glutathione and or cysteine. And so what would you have to do to make glutathione? Well, first of all, the 3 amino acids that make up this tripeptide are glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. The first step of glutathione synthesis is to combine glutamate and cysteine, and the second step is to combine glutamylcysteine, the product of the first step, with glycine. And so you need to have those 3 amino acids. And so the most basic number one thing that you need to do to have glutathione is to eat protein. And in fact, glutathione is something that's going to correlate with the fasting feeding cycle, such that glutathione will increase in the fed state and decrease in the fasting state. And that is in response to it's partly in response to dietary protein being the source of those amino acids. And so, how much protein do you need? Well, my general rule, not that I came up with it, but the general rule that I think is an easy way to state the requirement from the literature is you want a 0.5 gram to 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight. Generally, you want to hit on the upper side of that if you are trying to, a pound is 2.2 pounds is a kilogram, and so you can adjust that accordingly. But anyway, and just to simplify and not deal with a lot of percentages or decimals or anything like that, we could just say, just double those figures if you measure your weight in kilograms. So 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of target body weight. You want to be on the higher end of the range if you have a body composition goal, but if you're just talking about glutathione, the evidence generally indicates that if you're on the lower end of that range, it's adequate for glutathione synthesis. Not that that's been tested out in every conceivable context, but as a general rule, if you're hitting a 0.5 gram of protein per pound of body weight or 1 gram of protein per kilogram body weight, you are probably eating enough total protein to maximize your glutathione synthesis. Now, any of those amino acids can be limiting. However, glutamate is the most abundant amino acid in the diet and therefore is almost never limiting, but it can be limiting. So if you are, if you're a cancer patient with cachexia, or you are otherwise in a protein wasting catabolic state where any amino acid could be limiting, then glutamate can become limiting. Or if you're not eating enough protein, right? So if you're not eating enough protein, glutamate could easily become limiting. Glutamate would obviously be limiting if you were not eating any protein. You'd be on your way to death soon. But generally speaking, glutamate is not usually the limiting amino acid. There's a lot of thought around cysteine being the limiting amino acid, but generally speaking, if you have enough cysteine, glycine will become the limiting amino acid. And generally, the most difficult thing about glycine is that although there's a lot of glycine in any source of protein, glycine is disproportionately found in collagen-rich tissues, and non-collagen-rich tissues are disproportionately a source of methionine that actually taxes your glycine status. And so you can make a case for methionine to glycine balance. And so I have resources on that as well. So if you go to chrismasterjohnphd.com and you go to tools, you will find database balancing methionine and glycine, and you'll find all the details on that. You can also go to Google and type in Master John methionine glycine database. And so, okay, so let's say that you have all those amino acids in the proper balance. Then what are the other factors that are relevant? Well, each step of glutathione synthesis, as is not universally true, but often true of, universally true of any anabolic, meaning building up process in the body, is energy dependent. And as in the case of many of those processes, glutathione synthesis, both steps are ATP dependent. Anything that is ATP dependent is dependent on magnesium as an ATP magnesium chelate. And so magnesium is needed for glutathione synthesis. So getting more magnesium can help if you need more magnesium, but will not necessarily help because you might not need more magnesium. So check your magnesium status, as we covered in a couple videos ago. ATP opens up a can of worms because there are many things involved in making adequate ATP. So you need to eat enough calories, period. And you're going to have more ATP in the fed state than in the fasting state. And so that's another reason that glutathione is a correlate of the fed state, not only because that's where you get your protein, but that's because where your ATP levels are high enough. So overtraining and exhaustion and excessive calorie deficit and extended fasting and all of these things could be things that are going to tank your ATP levels, but also any disorder of energy metabolism. And that could be fairly common disorders such as hypothyroidism or diabetes, or it could be less common ones like adrenal insufficiency, or it could be rare ones like inborn errors of metabolism, of which there, I'm not sure how rare these actually are in the sense that there are hundreds of them at least, and there are probably an enormous proliferation of like ones that are so moderate that they will never get diagnosed, but aren't common polymorphisms of a gene, but are rare mutations that there are just so many of them that many people happen to have one, and if they're not bad enough to lead to something disastrous, will never get diagnosed, but you still have an ATP deficit because of it. And of course there's the rare severe ones, but then the other part of that can of worms is, what are all the nutrients involved in energy metabolism? Well, you could be deficient in iron, you could be deficient in copper, you could be deficient in sulfur, you could be deficient in any of the B vitamins, really. All of the B vitamins play some role in energy metabolism, but folate and B12 are somewhat lower down on the list in terms of their role being particularly indirect. And folate is probably the least directly involved in energy metabolism. But really a deficit of any of the B vitamins, but especially the B1 through 7 / biotin, any of those could hurt your ATP levels. So ATP itself, I think, is the most complicated thing to talk about in terms of how to boost your glutathione status, because any one of those things could be relevant to you or not relevant. So for example, if you're anemic, the iron's very relevant, but if you have iron overload, you're going to hurt your energy metabolism by getting too much, because as we talked about in the video from a week or so ago, why does iron overload cause diabetes? Excessive oxidative stress will destroy your energy metabolism, and iron is a contributor to that. But as we've been talking about recently, oxidative stress is another can of worms. Oxidative stress does hurt energy metabolism, but oxidative stress could be about vitamin E, vitamin C, glutathione itself, with a vicious cycle here. So if you have oxidative stress going on that's hurting your energy metabolism, that could create a vicious cycle that hurts your glutathione status. You got to resolve it by figuring out what the limiting factor is. But that could be vitamin E, vitamin C, glutathione, selenium, zinc, copper, manganese, iron, etc. Or energy metabolism, which is, glutathione is actually the interface between the antioxidant system and the energy metabolism system, because niacin and riboflavin use energy taken from glucose to recycle glutathione whenever it participates in the antioxidant system. So if you have anything wrong with oxidative stress or energy metabolism, you will probably have a vicious cycle that is going to be really hurting your glutathione status. And the solution might not be obvious, but you got to kind of approach it like a detective and figure out what the limiting factor is and how to fix it. Okay, so that's ATP. And then what are the signals that regulate glutathione synthesis? Well, glutathione synthesis is primarily regulated by the ability to make glutathione and the need for glutathione. And the need for glutathione is, well, let's hit the ability first. So what's the ability? Well, we just talked about everything involved in the ability. So you need to have enough protein, you need to have enough ATP. And both of those make glutathione a fed state correlate. Well, what would be a signal of having enough energy and enough protein? Insulin. And so you need to be sensitive to insulin. You need to have enough insulin. And that means that carbohydrate is going to play a role here, as well as overweight, oxidative stress, other contributors to insulin resistance. In fact, a couple days ago, we were talking about a study that showed that vitamin E could enhance. Actually, a couple days ago, what we were talking about in it, the title of the video was, is glutathione needed to increase red blood cell magnesium? That study was showing that insulin and glucose infusion enhances glutathione status, And if you put in vitamin E, you get even more enhancement of glutathione status. That study is a great example of the intersection between pumping in glucose and insulin to get insulin, and then putting in vitamin E to counteract oxidative stress to enhance the sensitivity to insulin to improve glutathione status even more. So there are various vicious cycles here that can be at play, where you might need to be putting covering all your bases in order to actually get progress on them. But anyway, insulin, because it's the primary fed state signal, is going to be an amplifier of the increased glutathione in the fed state versus the fasted state. And how much carbohydrate do you need? I doubt that there's a universal answer to that. The answer on protein is much more universal, because with protein, you're just dealing with the basic building blocks. But when you're talking about insulin, and protein to some degree plays into insulin, fat even does, particularly when it's combined with carbohydrate. But carbohydrate is the main governor of your insulin secretion. But because the insulin response to carbohydrate is going to depend on numerous factors, but especially your sensitivity to the insulin, then all of a sudden it becomes a much harder thing to say about how much do you need. Because now you're talking about your body's perception of, whenever you talk about regulation, you're talking about your body's, I'll put it in quotes because your body's not conscious in this way, but your body's perception of how much insulin that you need to handle that carbohydrate load and to do useful things with that carbohydrate. And so it's not obvious to me at all how much carbohydrate that should be given as a blanket rule. It's just more clear to me that there probably is no blanket rule. And I think the way to approach it would be, aim for glucose stability and healthy insulin levels on the lower end of the normal range during fasting. But to the degree that you're operating within those parameters, more carbohydrate will probably increase glutathione status. And at the end of the day, you probably would have to measure your glutathione on different carbohydrate intakes to really know what's maximizing your glutathione status. And your optimal carbohydrate intake is probably not going to be the same as mine for that purpose. So carbohydrate is kind of a wild card, I would say, but it's something that has to be on the table in a discussion of how to increase your liver's glutathione stores or glutathione synthesis. Now, the other part of the regulatory equation is the need for glutathione. And the need for glutathione is determined by the perceived oxidative stress balanced by the supply of glutathione. So oxidative stress tells you that you need more glutathione, but glutathione tells you that you don't need more glutathione. If you have glutathione, that tells you that you made enough glutathione. But if you, but the enzyme is going to incorporate the signals of oxidative stress and the signals of glutathione in order to take both of those inputs and make a calculation from them of how much enzyme you should have and how active it should be. And I say the perception of oxidative stress rather than oxidative stress because your body really perceives oxidative stress through various mechanisms, but the most prominent that we know about is the NRF2 pathway. But some things, as I've covered in previous videos, some things cause a lot of NRF2 activation and not that much actual oxidative stress, whereas others cause a lot of oxidative stress and not that much NRF2 activation. So if you can find dietary strategies, not just diet, it could be lifestyle. Smoking is a bad way of activating NRF2 because it activates NRF2, but it causes more oxidative stress. So it's net harmful. Exercise generates some oxidative stress, but the compensatory responses, particularly from, I know the compensatory responses with like mitochondrial biogenesis are better than the oxidative stress that you get. But I think it's probably also true that you'd have a net glutathione benefit, I would think. But polyphenolic compounds in fruits and vegetables or in or in well-designed detoxification promoting supplements, milk thistle, sulforaphane, etc., are generally going to be net NRF2 activators. And those are, so I view those supplements largely as a proxy for having a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and spices. So it's sort of like if you don't have a diet rich in those things, then you probably you'd be more likely to benefit from taking one of those supplements. Now the supply of glutathione, of course, is going to exert negative feedback on that negative feedback on the enzyme, and is going to tell you have enough glutathione, you don't need to make more. But that is mediated through, well, to the degree the glutathione protects against oxidative stress, it'll have an indirect effect on gene expression to lower the synthesis of glutathione, which is totally reversible. But it also is going to directly modify the activity of the enzyme, and that is even more reversible because that's a moment-to-moment thing. And so many people have asked me, and this maybe deserves a separate video, but it seems to fit in here, if taking glutathione supplements is going to hurt your glutathione synthesis. And there was a 6-month study that it's cited in, it might be in my glutathione database. If not, it's in an article, Consuming Glutathione in Foods and Supplements. And actually, let's see, if you go to tools, the glutathione database, it actually looks like I need to fix this. That's good to know. Let me see. Master John Consuming Glutathione in Foods and Supplements. If you just Google Master John Consuming Glutathione in Foods and Supplements, you will get an article on that. And there is a 6-month study cited in there where they looked at red blood cell glutathione synthesis and found that it was unaltered by 6 months of supplementing high-dose glutathione. And so that's interesting. It's only one data point, but I mean, it's obviously going to downregulate temporarily your glutathione synthesis, but I don't think it's going to do anything permanent. I think a lot of people think of this from the perspective of how people go on thyroid hormone and then they never get off. But I think when you're dealing with a hormone, I think it's a bit different because, well, first of all, I think the idea that when you go on thyroid hormone, you never get off is largely driven by the fact that you went on thyroid hormone and no one ever tried to fix the root of the problem. So of course you never were able to get off the thyroid hormone. I think that's the main issue. But hormones can atrophy their glands. And so I guess the most obvious example is the bodybuilder who injects anabolic steroids and never does anything in between cycles to compensate for that, like HCG injection, and then loses half their testicles. So if you atrophy the gland and destroy the tissue, of course, you're going to get a permanent or quasi-permanent or semi-permanent, or at least long-term deficit. But if you're just turning off an enzyme because of a negative feedback loop, I don't think that itself is going to do any long-term. I don't think it's going to create any long-term deficit of glutathione. So to review, and then I'll go to the live chat and field any questions on glutathione. To review, we want enough protein, we want enough magnesium, we want enough ATP, we want enough insulin, and we want to have the proper balance of methionine and glycine, and we want the proper signals that we need glutathione, that we can make glutathione, and that we don't have enough. And that, that comes down to basically down to having enough carbohydrate, having good insulin sensitivity, anything involved in antioxidant or energy metabolism could be a limiting factor in acquiring those things, and having polyphenolic constituents that create NRF2 activation and the perception of oxidative stress without causing proportional actual stress are all ways to kind of harness those things. So I'll field any questions on glutathione in the live chat now. Oh, it looks like we got a lot. Jaded Optimist says, I'm devastated about the banning of NAC. The FDA is evil. I am aware that was speculated about happening, but I haven't followed the news on that. So let me look really closely. Really quickly. Oh, this is interesting. FDA. This has something to do with beta alanine. FDA denies request to enforce against beta alanine supplements. Don't know why that's coming up for NAC. Says so. Someone Durkin, who once held this is on Natural Products Insider. I'm not familiar with this site. Argued FDA. Durkin argued FDA. Noted it bears the obligation to show an ingredient like beta alanine is subject to NDIN. Is that new drug? What's NDIN? And new dietary ingredient. What's NDIN? New dietary ingredient notification. Okay, NAC. And okay, so Durkin noted that the FDA, for example, while the agency has noted it bears the obligation to show an ingredient like beta alanine is subject to an NDIN. Okay, FDA's burden is to show that you need the new dietary ingredient notification. Durkin said FDA has placed the burden of proof on industry to establish NAC is not precluded. In 2020 warning letters, FDA asserted NAC was first approved as a drug in 1963 and therefore cannot lawfully be marketed as a supplement. FDA, however, is open to receiving evidence from industry that could change its mind. It just, well, I mean, that's fascinating. I don't know if I'd call the FDA evil, but they are obviously behaving this year as, borderline sociopathic agency that is totally geared towards approving drugs that don't work and disapproving dietary supplements that are totally safe. I mean, the fact that they just approved an Alzheimer's drug that has never shown any clinical benefit and gave the company 9 years in response to after marketing the drug show that it has a benefit, that it will then issue warning letters for something that's been sold in supplement stores my entire life, or at least since I knew anything about nutrition, and has a track record of, they said 1963, so 57 years, 58 years of safe use. I don't know. So I don't think they're banning it, though. I think they're saying, it sounds like they're retroactively saying that you need to sort of repetition the NAC to be able to use it. But if someone knows more about that than me, then feel free to add your comments. Elise says, will increased glutathione in the liver help with non-alcoholic fatty liver in any way? Yeah, because the main way is that antioxidant status is necessary to preserve ApoB. ApoB is highly vulnerable to oxidative stress and damage. If you damage ApoB, you hurt triglyceride export. Jaded Optimist says, do people with MTHFR mutated gene have an option to an NAC replacement? I don't understand your question. Are you saying if you can't get NAC, should you use something else? I just gave a whole list of things to do to increase glutathione status. I didn't even mention NAC, except in passing. But whey protein. I don't see why anyone needs NAC. What's wrong with whey protein? Okay. I mean, maybe an exception. There are exceptions to that, but in general, I don't see what's wrong with whey protein. Ted Hughes says, I still think it's ridiculous that the FDA will try to get rid of NAC as a supplement. Although I'm not sure that's what they're doing. It sounds like they're just putting on regulatory hurdles to make people file paperwork. But I'm not sure about that. So if you understand the legal situation, feel free to correct me. But yeah, so I think that's ridiculous, but it's NAC is not, I don't see why it would be the baseline way to increase glutathione, except that it just has a lot of fame from being used in emergency situations like acetaminophen hepatic toxicity in the emergency room. Ted Hughes says CBS mutation shunts TS pathway toward taurine versus glutathione pathway. So TS, I guess, is transsulfuration. Ted Hugh, I don't understand what you mean. So the transsulfuration pathway, glutathione and taurine are both significantly downstream from CBS. So I don't see how it's even possible that a CBS polymorphism would alter the glutathione taurine flux, unless it's very indirect. But I don't know what that argument is. Jaded Optimist says, would you recommend TUDCA supplement to strengthen the liver? I'm not familiar with TUDCA, sorry. Abhishek Anand says, is there a place I can find a schedule for these live streams? No. Or some way to get notified one day in advance? Absolutely not. These live streams are done at the beginning of my research and writing portion of my day and are completely and totally random. Any increased scheduling on that will make it not happen at all. So sorry, but I can't do that. But you can subscribe to notifications on any social media for when they do happen, but they are totally spontaneous, totally random. Jaded Optimist says, maybe a video in the future on TUDCA. Yeah, maybe if I'm happen to find out about it. Okay. So, Abhishek Anand says, notified about the time and topic. The time is random and the topic is decided immediately before I go on. So sorry. Stacy Swanson says, I have a sulfur intolerance I have never been able to completely resolve. The amino acids in supplement form make me feel dreadful. Glutathione is awful for me. Sulfur intolerance, if it's not a molybdenum issue or something that's easily resolved by molybdenum, is probably a gut problem. And it's probably driven by sulfur reducing bacteria in your gut. And so you should probably be working with someone primarily on gut health. Although higher dose molybdenum than, way higher than the RDA, like up towards the upper limit, like say 1 milligram 2 max, does have potential utility to help with gut problems, because in addition to processing sulfite to sulfate in our enzymes, molybdenum does shut down sulfur metabolism in sulfur metabolizing bacteria. Kai Camp says, I've been hearing NAC supplementation can cause a lot of issues from excess cystine. Is there a way to know if it's a good idea to take? Yeah, I kind of doubt it. But I don't, it's literally never my baseline supplement. And it's hard for me to think of any particular reason why it would be the first in line supplement. Shay says, is it helpful in negating glyphosate damage? I don't know. I would be surprised if it wasn't. But I'm not well versed in glyphosate, but I do, from what I recall hearing from others, I believe glyphosate can mimic glycine, and so it probably hurts glutathione synthesis. So if you were to, in that case, you might want to straight up supplement with glutathione. If it's directly hurting your glutathione synthesis. Shay says, love your work, by the way. Thanks, Doc. Thanks, Shay. A.L. Aaron says, do the enzymes that make glutathione need any cofactors to work properly? Yes, magnesium and ATP. Marcus Deminable says, more glutathione would be beneficial to someone with COPD, if I recall correctly. Yeah, a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Glutathione is utterly essential in numerous important ways to the lungs. The three most important ways are: the lungs are very vulnerable to oxidative stress because they're on the outside of your body, just like your skin and your gut are. And so they're subject to the assaults of every random piece of crap in your environment that your body prevented from getting into your bloodstream, but couldn't prevent from coming into contact with your lungs, skin, or gut. So as an antioxidant and to some limited degree detoxifier in that case, and then as a maintainer of mucus fluidity, glutathione is the thing that maintains your mucus fluidity, and without it, your mucus will all go like this into a giant ball that is obstructing your lungs. And then it combines with nitric oxide to make nitrosoglutathione to dilate your bronchioles. So, for example, asthmatics take bronchodilators for one reason, which is that they don't have enough nitrosoglutathione in their lungs. So glutathione is your mucus fluidity provider. It is your bronchodilator, and it is the primary protection of the lungs from the damage induced by the environment. A.L. Aaron says, do enterocytes and hepatocytes absorb intact glutathione through channels or exchangers that require specific minerals or vitamins? That's a good question. So I don't recall seeing dependency of the glutathione transporters, but let me see if I can find that really quickly. So there's one glutathione transporter that's listed as dependent on magnesium and ATP, but nothing else. I'm not fully sure of the diversity of glutathione transporters, but at least what I can find quickly suggests that magnesium and ATP are the only cofactors. Let me look real quickly at I thought there was a second one. Hold on. Not sure if this is the same transporter or if it's just a different name, but there's one that it looks like there might be a second transporter that is also just dependent on magnesium and ATP. So as far as I can quickly tell, only magnesium and ATP are needed. Chaz says NAC is banned. I don't think it's banned, but someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is. I think FDA is putting on regulatory hoops for supplement companies to jump through. I think they're basically saying you've been using this for decades, but now it has to get approved. Fire Top Man says coffee enemas produce glutathione. I don't know. Maybe can you cite the study? I can't take links in the streaming software that I'm using to combine all the apps. So if you post a study on coffee enemas, just post the title, and I'll just search the title to look at it. But I've never heard of that. Dennis Bolanos says, what is a good maintenance dose of trisomal glutathione? I'm not familiar with that trademarked brand of glutathione, but if you're trying to keep in the realm of what studied doses are, then 500 to 1,000 milligrams of glutathione a day. I've never seen it studied, but if you were trying to hit sort of max replacement of daily synthesis, you'd be looking at 5 grams, 5.2 grams. But I've never seen that studied, so I can't comment on the safety benefits or drawbacks of it. But you're looking at 500 to 1,000 milligrams if you're looking at what's been reasonably studied across numerous studies. Throat says, what about these artificially low methionine diets? I've seen even some dairy products manufactured to be low in it. Yeah, they're going to kill glutathione status because glutathione is dependent on cysteine, which is either obtained as cysteine or is derived from methionine. Anonymous guest says, eat people nose to tail. Well, I wouldn't eat people. but nose to tail is a good way to get methionine and glycine balance if you're eating animals. A.L. Aaron says, why is NAC less toxic than L-cysteine? Well, let me share my screen and let's look at an acetylcysteine structure. Let's go to images. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure why it is less toxic, because the reactivity is going to be from this sulfhydryl group, but I'm going to guess that it's from steric hindrance. So let me think through this. So like, let's say this sulfur loses the hydrogen and becomes negatively charged. So there's going to be a charge effect. Well, if something, so it would probably get oxidized and lose the negative charge. I don't think there's a charge effect. I think there's probably a steric hindrance effect where just the bulk of this extra group. So cysteine would be like this portion on the right here, and then there's this giant acetyl group attached to the nitrogen. And I might be wrong, and maybe I should know this off the top of my head better, but I'm just going to guess from the structure that this acetyl group is just getting in the way of things reacting with the sulfur group because it's nearby and it's big. And when things are nearby and they're big and the big thing gets in the way, that's called steric hindrance. ILGA6 says there's too many vitamins. Sorry, I didn't make nature. Anonymous guest keeps talking about eating people, so I don't support that. He says, okay, I'll stop messing with you. I support that. Okay. So throat, I'm only fielding questions about glutathione. A.L. Aaron says, is it true that supplementing? Yeah, I'm only fielding questions on glutathione right now. Same anonymous guest on iron. A.L. Aaron says, can people with G6PD deficiency compensate somehow to increase their low glutathione levels? So in G6PDH deficiency, your issue is that you're generating less NADPH for glutathione synthesis, and so it's harder to recycle glutathione. I actually have a video on my proposed hypothetically brainstormed way to deal with G6PDH deficiency, and I would suggest searching YouTube or my website for that. But the gist of it is that NADPH is involved in anabolic and reductive reactions, such as recycling glutathione, recycling vitamin K, recycling folate, or building cholesterol, building fatty acids, building nucleotides, building neurotransmitters. And so I think consuming a diet that is rich in organ meats and rich in animal foods and rich in animal fat, and generally rich in all the products of NADPH that rely on NADPH will probably spare NADPH best. But supplementing glutathione might be helpful. And I actually had a consulting client who has G6PDH deficiency, who had, before he became my client, had gravitated towards basically that diet, on the basis of it just improved how he felt dramatically. So I have some basis for thinking it actually works. Not that there's any studies on it. Ted Hughes says keto versus carb-driven ATP. Can you elaborate, please? Vospi says, thanks for your insane amount of work. Greetings from Russia. Bought the Cliff Notes tonight. Thank you so much, Vospi. If anyone wants the Cliff Notes of Vitamins and Minerals 101 for $3, you can pick it up at chrismasterjohnphd.com/Cliff Notes. Brotein says there a negative feedback loop on glutathione production where excess glutathione would trigger other pathways that can become detrimental. I'm not sure what you mean. The negative feedback loop is mainly enzymatic inhibition of the first step in glutathione synthesis. But I don't see, if you're asking if there's negative feedback on other pathways, generally not, because generally having more glutathione is positive for the, it will alter your metabolic pathways, but it'll generally alter them in a way that's favorable to health. Jan 2852 says, what's the difference between glutamate and glutamine? And are they interchangeable for glutathione synthesis? Glutamate and glutamine are not interchangeable for glutathione synthesis, but they are interchangeable in that they can be converted back and forth to one another. So glutamate is basically, they're basically the same amino acid, but glutamine has ammonia incorporated into it, and glutamate doesn't. So you generally will, well, you can interconvert them on an as-needed basis for the amino acid, but you will also interconvert them on an as-needed basis for in the nervous system, when you need to control glutamate transmission, or when you need to control ammonia levels. If you don't have enough ammonia because you have acidity that needs buffering, you'll convert glutamine to glutamate. If you have too much ammonia and you're at risk of hyperammonemia, or elevated ammonia in the nervous system, you're going to do the opposite and convert glutamine to glutamate. So you can get glutamate from glutamine, but you can't synthesize glutathione from glutamine. But if you eat glutamine, then you will convert some of that to glutamate, and you will make glutathione from that. But both of those are generally very abundant in the diet. So if you're eating enough protein, you probably don't need to do that. Adrian, by the way, glutamine does, there's questions about its systemic bioavailability because glutamine can easily be converted, easily be consumed for energy by the gut. Adrian Gregory says, I can't find raw milk in my country. Is HTST pasteurized milk safe to drink, and does it increase glutathione? I have a whole article about this. So let's see. If you Google Master John glutathione raw milk, we have the biochemical magic of raw milk and other raw foods on the Weston A. Price site. The second link that pops up in Google is the right one. But let's see. What happened to the figures in this? I could have. All right. For some reason, the graphs that I made are gone from this article, unless they're somehow. I don't know what happened to the graphs. Unfortunately, the Weston A. Price site is extremely. It's the most mismanaged website on the internet, and it has been for 15 years. Anyway, you'll get glutathione boost from HTST pasteurized milk. It's probably about half that of raw milk, but it's, because it provides whey proteins, it does increase glutathione status. All right, just as a reminder, I'm fielding questions just on glutathione. Aaron says, how does glycine-methionine ratio affect glutathione? Well, if you have too much methionine, that can deplete your glycine. You won't have enough glycine to make glutathione. Again, go to Chris Masterjohn tools, chrismasterjohnphd.com, tools, the database balancing methionine glycine, or just Google Masterjohn glycine methionine balance database, and you'll get the details on that. John 2052 says, is MSM beneficial for glutathione synthesis? I don't know why it would be. I mean, it provides sulfur, but it's not, that sulfur can't back convert into cysteine. I suppose it's conceivable that it would, conserve cysteine, but I doubt it, because generally, I really doubt it. But if it is, it would be from conserving cysteine, probably. Giant 2052 says, is L-cysteine a good replacement for NAC for glutathione? No, for the reasons that I described earlier. If you're eating enough protein, you really probably don't need cysteine. If you're eating enough protein and you still need cysteine, it's probably because you're not eating enough animal protein. And I think, if you need more cysteine, I think whey protein would be a better source than either of those. Money Manusa 7 says, why is raw meat higher in glutathione than cooked? If that's true, and I'd have to go back to my database, I haven't looked at it in a long time, it would be because heat destroys glutathione by oxidizing it. Jaded Optimist says NAC has been an effective preventative treatment for COVID. That's why it's been banned. Well, there's very, very limited evidence for that. Exceedingly limited evidence for NAC and COVID. It does make sense. It probably is helpful, particularly for the respiratory aspect of the problem. I doubt that's why it's been banned. And I don't think it's banned. I think they're creating regulatory hoops. But I don't know why they wouldn't have taken firmer action much earlier if that's what they were concerned about. And in particular, given that COVID's essentially over in the United States, but in particular, like, there wasn't much publicity around NAC and COVID. It's not like it was, ivermectin or something. Jade Optimist says Amazon removed all NAC from its site. Yeah, well, I guess the question would be, does that NAC go back there if the supplement industry complies with the regulatory hoops that the FDA is putting out? Just random comment. This happened when I was in grad school. So at some point between 2009, I was in 08, but I know it was at least as late as 2009, and it was before 2012. The FDA made it so that you had to have an investigation of a new drug. You had to fill out an investigation of a new drug form if you're studying nutrients. If your intention is to sort of look at any kind of health effect. So this is not a recent reaction to COVID. This is a long-standing attack on foods and supplements that started in the 2008-ish era. That's also when they were like, feds were raiding Rawsome Food Co-op in California. That's died down a little bit. But there's been a broad-based attack on food and supplements in the regulatory agencies that is just a very long-term trajectory, largely started circa 2008. It was always there, but like very exceedingly accelerated in 2000 or circa 2008. Giant 2852 says, can SIBO be an adaptive condition to create hydrogen sulfate to help glutathione synthesis due to insufficient dietary sulfate or cholesterol sulfate sun exposure? No, because SIBO bacteria cannot create sulfur at all. So bacteria can't make elements. Sheila M says, I just joined. What do you think of glutathione patches? I don't know. I don't know why anyone would take glutathione in a patch. It seems like the absorbability would be a lot lower there. Waylon Holbrook says, so instead of Mucinex, glutathione is a better alternative. Glutathione is the natural way that your body maintains mucus fluidity. If you need Mucinex, it's probably because you don't have enough glutathione in your lungs. So you can attach, using your values, the word better to one of those there. But all right, looking for more glutathione questions. Gabriel says, thoughts on liposomal capsule glutathiones? Is rectal syringe better? There's not really any clear, well, first of all, there's no evidence that liposomes survive digestion, and there is evidence against it. Unless they're like pegylated or, modified in some way to protect them from digestive contents. Second of all, there's no evidence that liposomal glutathione outperforms regular glutathione, especially on a cost basis, given how much more expensive it is. And there's no conceivable reason why you would want a rectal syringe of glutathione. No conceivable reason at all. And glutathione isn't absorbed intact from regular supplements. So, I mean, you can self-experiment with any of those approaches, and if one works for you better, great. But there's no mechanistic reasoning or scientific evidence that liposomal glutathione is better than regular glutathione, especially on a, it's especially unlikely to be on a per dollar basis. And there's no even conceivable reason why you would ever want a rectal syringe of glutathione unless you were specifically trying to improve your colonic health. Then maybe shooting it up your rectum would be a very good way of locally increasing your rectal glutathione levels. Marcus Diminable says, would you suggest straight-up glutathione supplement for someone with asthma or COPD, perhaps also paired with magnesium glycinate? Well, someone else mentioned that they have asthma and reduced glutathione makes it worse. And there's some conflicting evidence on using it, but I think that I have some very limited undiagnosed asthma that comes and goes during certain periods of my life, and it's extremely positively responsive to glutathione. So I think it could be tried, but for asthma, but I think you have to be careful that some people seem to have an immunological reaction to it through some mechanism I don't quite understand. Although I think the evidence for that is more on nebulized glutathione. But someone in the comments here just said that they get asthma from reduced glutathione. I mean, I get asthma occasionally, and reduced glutathione cures it almost instantaneously, like within very close to instantaneously. But COPD, I think, I believe there's some studies on NAC, and it would probably respond very well to glutathione, I'm guessing. Abhishek Anand says, NHC seems to reliably help a lot with runny nose within 1 or 2 days. How does it do that? Well, it's probably doing it by benefiting your immune system and getting rid of the source of the runny nose. But it could also have an antioxidant effect that indirectly has an anti-inflammatory effect. It could also maybe it's also dilating your nasal passages in a manner analogous to how it does bronchial passages, but I'm less sure about that. Trisha Dare says, please describe how to select bioavailable whey and best ways to enhance uptake utilization. Most whey protein on the market is good whey protein these days. Pick something that's treated with low heat, and it's pretty good, and there's nothing you need to do to enhance its uptake or utilization. Ismail Ibrahim says, any reason long-term NAC supplementation is a bad idea? Some populations, like people with autism, seem to have lower levels and they supplement long-term. I don't see why it would be a bad idea long term. Although, as I said before, I don't generally see NAC as like a first line defense in really any situation. Giant 2852 says garlic, onions, cruciferous. Do the sulfur benefits outweigh the risks? It's impossible to answer that in a general way, because the only real risks of consuming sulfur foods like that are if you have a sulfur intolerance. They yeah, some of them have like goitrogens, but I'm not covering that right now. So Ted Hughes says, you mentioned insulin modulated ATP production. What is corollary for keto pathway driving ATP production? Are they roughly equivalent, or is one more efficient? I don't really understand what you're asking about. I mean, what do you mean keto pathway driving ATP production? They're not you can't compare them as to what's more efficient, because they don't really have anything to they're not interchangeable or directly comparable at all. So ketones are energy substrates that you can produce ATP from, like you can produce from fatty acids or glucose or protein or carbohydrate. But insulin is a hormone that has a hormonal effect. So they're not more or less efficient. There's an argument over ketones being like more efficient substrates for respiration, but uh, I've glanced at that research, but I don't buy that argument, and so I can't really address that question without breaking it down for hours. So um, all I can say here is I don't think the two are directly comparable, but a keto diet is according to all available evidence going to lower whole body glutathione synthesis. Even Dom D'Agostino argues that one of the major cancer benefits of ketogenic diets is that cancer cells have a higher need for glutathione, and keto diets prevent them from making it or recycling it. So Kevin Klein says, does supplemental alpha lipoic acid have a big effect on glutathione? Off the top of my head, I don't know. I haven't looked at the studies on that, but I don't see why it would have a big effect. But it might have an effect by supporting energy metabolism or antioxidant protection. Fire Top Man says, how would you break a 90-day juice? I actually have a video on breaking juice fast, but I'm only fielding glutathione questions. Daniel Torian says, what are the rate-limiting enzymes that allow for further transformation of glutathione into superoxide A dismutase and then further into metallothionein, zinc, magnesium, phosphorus? Glutathione cannot be transformed into superoxide dismutase or into metallothionein. Adrian Gregory says, what's the influence of cigarette smoking on glutathione? Cigarette smoking decreases glutathione status. Giant 2852 says, I began trying spray glutathione to be absorbed orally. Is this a farce, or should we stick to capsule glutathione supplements? I don't know of any studies comparing them head to head, but so I can't really answer that. Oral supplements have been tested more. So Jan 2852 says, my friend began supplementing glutathione and his COPD chronic bronchitis is greatly reduced. That's great. Waylon Holbrook says, what glutathione do you take? I'm not currently taking glutathione, but I have Jarrow reduced glutathione in my cabinet that I occasionally use, but I don't take it right now. Anonymous guest says, that's a t-shirt right there. Have you increased your rectal glutathione today? Well, maybe someday I'll be in the t-shirt business, but I don't know if I'd wear that t-shirt, but I might. Leo Delaplante says, what about sulforaphane, which activates the NRF2 pathway? I mentioned that as a way to increase glutathione status. Oh, Kai Camp clarifies that nebulized reduced glutathione is what gives me the issues. I know a lot of people get the same issue. Well, then that settles it. There is no one I know of who says that taking oral reduced glutathione worsens their asthma, but there is some. There are numerous anecdotes and at least one case series or study that that did find nebulized glutathione made it worse. So I don't know if that's has something to do with other things in the delivery method or if it's something about the vehicle. But it seems like nebulized glutathione is the issue with asthma. Wellness path for me says glutathione peroxidase is copper dependent, and the presence of that copper depends on ceruloplasmin bound copper, which depends on ATP7B activity, retinoic acid, and magnesium activated. Well, all right. You did this yesterday. So let me look and see if glutathione peroxidase is actually copper dependent. Um, uh, so there are at least 42 studies showing it's selenium dependent. Um, it's been shown to be what even is this organism? In coho salmon, it's been shown to have its expression hurt by cadmium. That's been shown in coho salmon. Some other species I don't know. Japanese sea bass, it's been shown to have its activity increased by manganese. And as far as I know, the only one of these that is actually a structural component of it is selenium. Wait a second. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that that's wrong as you stated it. So I'll just say this again. You can't say that an enzyme is something dependent unless that's a cofactor for that enzyme. Um, you can, no one talks about enzyme like no one says like ceruloplasmin is a life dependent enzyme because if you die, its activity stops. Um, and so, yes, it makes sense to point out that copper, through various layers of biological complexity, as I already pointed out, is needed indirectly for glutathione synthesis, recycling, etc. But that it is not correct to say glutathione peroxidase is copper dependent. So if you don't want to get rolling eyes or people that are sort of saying this person doesn't know what they're talking about, you shouldn't state it like that. You should speak in the way that everyone else in biochemistry speaks. It's not just biochemical experts. Like you'll never find a scientific paper or a textbook that talks about enzymes in that way. Okay. Again, I'm just fielding glutathione questions. Okay, I'm looking for some glutathione questions. Paul Sullivan says, what form of glutathione supplement do you recommend? I use liposomal. I don't think there's anything wrong with liposomal, but there's no evidence that it's better than regular reduced glutathione, and it's more expensive. And I've used both, and I haven't really found any reason to justify spending more money on liposomal. Someone says they hope the books don't fall. Those books aren't falling. All right. Well, looks like that's it for today. So please see the description for some ways that you can support my work. Please like and subscribe wherever you are if you found this valuable, and hope to see